Hello and welcome to the Divorce Discussions. I'm Angie Weber, the director of the Divorce Support Collective. At the Collective, our mission is to reimagine the process of divorce through collaboration and support from contemplation to thriving post-decree. And we are excited to bring you another episode of Divorce Discussions, where we sit down with professionals who are helping individuals navigate divorce with confidence, clarity, and care. Our goal is to inspire, educate, and empower you. And today I am so excited to introduce you to Mary Ann Hughes, who is committed to helping parents of children with special needs navigate divorce challenges. Mother of sons on the autism spectrum, she founded Special Family Transitions after her divorce and supports family and divorce transitions as a certified special needs divorce coach, premeditation divorce coach, mediator, and parenting coordinator. And I appreciate you being here with me and the viewers today, Mary Ann.
Thank you, Angie. Thrilled to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Now, I'm so excited to have you on because you really do work in a specialized field, helping those parents of children with special needs. So we know that you have sons on the autism spectrum, but what else really made you decide that you wanted to fill this need out there, that maybe not a lot of people know is there, there's that type of support?
Yeah, definitely. So I went through divorce myself several years ago. And while I went through, I was just so overwhelmed, didn't know how to start the process, what to consider in a special needs divorce, and tried to find specialists. And it was really hard to do that. And so my divorce took a lot of time, effort, and energy and money. And so I didn't feel like with the prevalence of divorce among special needs families that it should be so hard and go through so much trouble to get through the process. So that's what inspired me to help others so they wouldn't have to recreate the wheel. And so decided to form my own company for the first time and did lots of training, certifications so I could help people and help them along the way to get a successful outcome as well as help them navigate the process with less stress so they can do what they feel is right for themselves and for their family.
Yeah, now, and I apologize. I probably should have done some research before we hopped on here. But would you say that the divorce rate among families with children with disabilities or special needs is higher than maybe like typical kids?
It's definitely higher in my experience and research that I've read. There's some debate about the actual number. Some people say 80%, some even higher. But the whatever the number is definitely higher than the 50 or so percent we hear for typical type divorces. And there's a lot of challenges then involved in that.
Sure, sure. So let's dive into that. What are some of the unique challenges that these families are facing while they're going through divorce that maybe other families don't see?
Sure. Well, in a typical divorce, you're going to think about the child and their needs till they're 18. And after that, maybe college. But after that, most likely they'll be independent and you won't have to worry about taking care of them on a day to day basis and planning for their future. And that's not the case when you have a child with some sort of developmental disability or physical disability. They may require your care for their entire life in some fashion. Maybe it looks different for different families, but they are not going to be totally independent and able to support themselves. And so that's the really the crux of it is, how do we plan for our kids, no matter what age they are, whether they're young as we're going through the process or whether they're becoming adults or already adults. When we're going through divorce, how do we then consider the future planning needs and what their costs are now and in the future?
That is such a good point. So I'm assuming, along with your guidance and expertise, you may suggest that really working with someone like a financial advisor as well to make sure that those long-term saving goals are established, even if the children are very young when the divorce is happening.
Exactly. I'm part of a team effort. They're definitely not here to do it on my own. And somebody going through divorce, definitely, it's hard to do on their own, especially when there's special needs involved. And part of the team members, like you said, there's specialized financial planners. Some of them are called charter special needs consultants and special needs financial planners who can help you kind of figure that out, what it looks like in the future. And then you also want to work with a family law attorney who understands special needs and what it takes, what you have to advocate for and what you need to include in your decree. A lot of people don't really have that experience. We want to make sure to find a legal professional that does have that experience. Another legal professional that is helpful is a special needs estate planning attorney. As
Mm.
part of the divorce and planning for the future, like you said, you're going to have to develop some special need trusts. There's several types of those for different purposes, but it's important to have those set up, either discuss as part of the divorce or in the future, because you have to protect that child in terms of the monies that they receive or will be receiving so that they can be eligible and maintain their eligibility for government benefits. That's really important. If we don't do it right the first time, it can inadvertently impact a family's income and how that child receives benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I'm glad that you touched on that question of, or that topic of you really doing this as a team effort, because at the Divorce Support Collective, that is our approach as well, that we really want to make sure that we're looking at this from the perspective of we are not, we'd love to stay in our own lane. And we know that there are so many different professionals that can really be the A team, the support team for individuals going through, or families going through divorce. And so I'm glad that you touched on all those different professions that you also work along with so that you can really help your clients thrive through it as best as they can. Now, you already shared a little bit about, okay, before with families with children with special needs, we have those things that we have to think about before, like long-term care, long-term finances. Are there any other differences that you see going kind of approaching the divorce that families with special needs children typically face?
Yeah, most definitely. So, depending on what their disability is or their complex need, it may be harder for them to accept what's happening to the family, to know how to deal with it, to deal with the transitions. And so sometimes that may come out in terms of behavior issues or different challenges and different things that we may see at school as well as at home. And so that's the key: is how do we um, support that child during that process to make it as smooth for them as possible in a kind and gentle fashion as much as we can. So I recommend um, definitely not having this happen all at once, all the changes all at once. Hopefully, there'll be a ramp up in terms of them getting through that change. For instance, the way I had to help my kids, because it was hard for me to find a mental health professional who's also a key member of the can be a key member of the team to help support my kids because of one of their levels of ability. They weren't able to maybe work with a professional like that. And so I had to create what they call a social story, which is an easy to explain um, format, and it's one that they can relate to in terms of what's happening next, with visuals, with easy to understand language, so that they can know what's going to be happening when, and maybe what they can expect to lower their anxiety and know that they're still loved by both parents, but things are going to look a little different. And so we want to maybe in terms of visiting, going to each parent's home, maybe gradually build up to that. If they have uh, spent most of their time with one of the parents, the primary caregiver, it may take a while to adjust, maybe spending time away from that parent and more time with the other parent. So we want to do it slowly, not all of a sudden one weekend or 1 week, okay, no contact with the other parent.
Yeah, yeah. Great point. I do want to talk about the transition piece of it because that can be hard for so many children. But I want to kind of go a little bit more into the journey of divorce. So we talked about, what are some of the challenges as we're leading up to the divorce? What about during the divorce process? What are some challenges that you typically see with these families?
Yeah, so sometimes the parents are on different pages in terms of the child's disability, meaning one parent may feel the child is more independent and maybe doesn't need as many supports and requests that the other parent is trying to have as part of the divorce. Um, so, for instance, I saw divorce as a long-term life care plan, whereas some other people may see it as just let's take care of dividing the assets and deal with other things later. So I would suggest looking at kind of the big picture now, so that we have provisions in place for when things do happen or when we need to reevaluate that we can do that in a manner that works without having to go back through the legal system or whatever it might be. So sometimes it requires having a report, medical reports, or mental health professionals to share um, like a third party view of what that child's abilities are and their needs. Because, as I mentioned, sometimes people disagree on the level of need, and that translates really into financial support. So, for instance, a lot of the families, not all, but a lot of them may have one parent be the primary financial provider. And so we've got to figure out what that's going to look like to have it work where if the one parent is going to continue to be the primary caregiver, what are they going to need to make it work for that child, either through child support or other ways that they can then meet those needs. So it's important to understand what the needs are and put a number to those, and maybe also investigate other options for the future. For instance, if your child maybe is close to aging out of high school, what are some next steps? Where might they go in the future? What's that going to cost? What is that going to look like? Can they be accepted to those? And then looking at maybe residential options down the road. Not that we have a crystal ball and need to plan all this right now, but just kind of like an idea. So when these things do happen, how are we going to address them as the parents?
Yeah, and in parenting, being proactive versus reactive is such a goal, or should be a goal of many people, because when we're in the reactive state, a lot more emotions can come into play as well, which can make us make decisions maybe that we wouldn't have before. So I love having kind of those different game plans figured out. All right, let's talk about the after divorce then. What are some of those challenges after the decree is signed and the divorce is finalized?
Right. So we want to make sure we have a good co-parenting plan in place and good communication so that the child doesn't feel like they're in the middle when they're going back and forth or with one parent. So we want them to have hopefully a good relationship with both parents, and both parents to have respectful communications with each other as much as possible. So whether that's in person or through a parenting app, there's definitely ways to do that. But it's important through divorce and after divorce to keep the child's needs first, and their how they may be impacted by what's going on.
Absolutely. And in my my full-time business, being a parent coach, that is what I remind co-parents of constantly, is that yes, your relationship is no longer a romantic one, yet you still have a relationship that you need to figure out how to navigate now to keep the children's interest as top of mind. So do you see a lot, again, maybe the couple has divorced when the children are a little bit younger, they thought they had a good game plan, figured out the, plan A, plan B, plan C. But as the children do get older, now they're kind of deciding like, this doesn't really align as well as we thought it was going to. Do you see a lot of those families, especially with those with children with special needs, kind of go back to their custody or agreement or their plan as the children are getting older to make adjustments?
Sure, that's definitely something that you can do. And so I would have as much flexibility in the plan, uh, depending on your situation, if that's going to be helpful or be a negative. But yeah, definitely this is something that's going to be a living document that maybe will require changes. Maybe your child maybe wasn't diagnosed at the time of divorce. You're going to have to relook that. You're going to have to look if you didn't plan for ongoing child support if you're in a state that supports that. So maybe you incorporate that, or maybe you change the amounts of child support or change what the schedule looks like. So we want to be as flexible as we can so that we're recognizing and respecting both parents' needs and concerns as well as the child. And we mentioned earlier about the good communication. So sometimes people who have maybe a child who's nonverbal feel like they can have conversations in front of that child, thinking they won't understand, but that's not the reality. Sometimes people who may not be able to verbalize their concerns, they can understand, even if they can't speak it, they can understand what's being said or understand the tone, and that can impact them as well. So I just want to share that too.
Great point, because again, as I say as a parent coach, our kids are watching us all of the time, even when we don't want them to. So they are picking up way more than we anticipate sometimes. And I love that point of even if they're nonverbal, they're still able to understand and pick up on what you're saying. Now, let's chat a little bit more about the transition piece, because I'm sure that you've seen this, that it's hard for children just in the beginning of the divorce to transition and trying to figure out like, wait a minute, mom and dad, or whoever, both the parents aren't living together anymore. And then if they do have a custody split, that transition between the homes, even maybe at the beginning or years after, what are some tips you have for families with children with special needs as far as transition goes?
Right. So I would say, you're going to know your child best. And so there's some children, for instance, those on the autism spectrum who have a hard time with change and changing routine. And so I don't suggest a schedule that has very frequent transitions back and forth between homes in 1 week, depending on the child, if they may not be able to handle that. And so just think of it as if you're going on vacation, you're packing a suitcase, you're planning a trip, you get somewhere, it takes a while to adjust, and then it takes a while to come back and adjust in the new home. And so sometimes you may have a child, what they call masking, so kind of hiding their behaviors or their emotions when they were one parent, and they kind of let loose when they come back at another parent, or just to just kind of readjust to the routine in that household. So we want to give them time, and so we want to limit, I guess, the transitions back and forth. Not that I'm against the child seeing both parents, but we want to kind of be cognizant of how we're doing that as well.
Sure, I think that's a great point. Marianne, you have given us so many amazing tips and suggestions and things to think about. I have a couple more questions for you, and one of them is, and maybe you can draw this from your own experience a little bit as well, but is there anything that we haven't touched on that these families should consider as they are approaching divorce or going through divorce if they have a child with a special need or disability?
Sure, like you said, it's a very scary process. There's so many things to consider that we don't know what we don't know, and so that's why working with teams of people like you're doing and sharing and providing to get that information. So we may not know about parenting or co-parenting. We may not know some of the legal aspects that we need to be aware of as we're going through this process. We may not know about the legal in terms of the financial implications of things that we do and don't do as part of this process. And so it's very important, especially in this case when it's critical that we make sure that that child has many benefits and access to resources in the future, that we're doing things in a way that doesn't impact their ability to receive that. And plus, it's so overwhelming on parents to be a child of a disability. It causes stress in marriages and it causes stress day to day. And so even if you have a parent and you're parenting time and you're a child, doesn't mean you have to do it all by yourself as well. So bring in a sitter, bring in support even while the child is with you, so you can have a break. Or if you've been used to during marriage having time off and time to cool down or time to just relax, we don't have that. When we're 24/7 taking care of that child who may have a lot of needs and they may not sleep through the night or whatever it is, and it can be exhausting. There's a high rate of caregiver burnout. So take care of yourself too. That's an important thing that sometimes we forget to talk about, is we've got to be in the best position that we are and healthy mentally, so that we can take best care of our kids and make good decisions in divorce and after as well.
Absolutely. And that was my last question I was going to ask you because, having a child with special needs and disabilities, like you said, there's a lot of caregiver burnout that's happening. Yet when we have to play that role, it's you don't have a choice. You do because you love your child, but it can be very taxing on you. And it's the old cliche saying of you can't pour from an empty cup, and people talking about, self-care. However, self-care is so essential. So you have a child with a disability, for example, and then you're going through a divorce that brings in so many more emotions and so much more stress to your life. I was going to ask you, what is your suggestion specifically? Because we've talked a lot about how do we plan for the children? How do we make this the best transition for them possible? What are things we need to consider specifically with these children? But I want you just to speak to the parents for just a minute here, with those children with special needs, and how maybe a tip or two on how to get that self-care in, because we already kind of hit on how important it is.
Right. So I would say, first of all, don't rush into anything in divorce, right? We may feel like we have to just get this done and over with and maybe not make the best decisions. And these decisions are impacting us and they're impacting our kids. So think about it. So if you've been involved as an advocate or planning for your child in school, for instance, at IEP meetings or special education settings, you're there representing the child and sharing what they need. And so I would take that same approach in divorce. We know what that child needs inside and out. And so we want to be able to be confident in sharing that information with our legal and divorce team, as well as sharing that in a respectful fashion to the other person who maybe hasn't been involved or hasn't seen those kind of challenges and that child. So figure out a plan, how can we do this together, or find a way that that child needs can be addressed. And like you said, in terms of making time for ourselves, uh, that's I find that a lot of parents, even when they're married, don't make time for themselves when they have a child that has a lot of needs, and so that's important to do. So whether it's a relative or whether there's um, people that you can hire and do what they call a respite, or take them somewhere for a weekend, or even for a few hours. For instance, some of the churches around me have parents' night out, or parents' day outs, where they can just drop off their kids for a few hours. They may do it once a month or whatever that schedule looks like, so that you can get a break. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be you having just downtime to just catch up on things, or catch up with some friends, or just relax, whatever it is. Sometimes I just start my day with a cup of coffee and just a little walk, just to kind of get me in the right mindset. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy for self-care. So you'll think it has to be going to a club or massage or anything like that. If you want to do that, great. But sometimes we don't have the time in our day to do that. So just make an effort, if you can, just, even 5 minutes, just kind of take a break, relax, take a nap, scroll through videos if that kind of brings you joy, whatever it is.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much, Mary Ann, for joining us today and giving all of those nuggets of information and things to think about. Very impactful, especially for those families with children with special needs. Now, listeners and viewers, make sure you head to the caption, because you're going to be able to get connected with Mary Ann. She has so many different resources to check out, including her website, social media, a Facebook group. So make sure you go check out those links. Again, thank you, Mary Ann, for your time. And for you viewers, please make sure you keep your eyes out for the next episode of Divorce Discussions, and we'll see you next time. Hello and